was the meeting seen and heard around the globe.
It took place in the Oval Office Friday and it blew up the old world order. Let's watch.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
The clash then went further south, with Zelensky trying to defend himself and Trump berating him. Let's watch.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Over the weekend, we've seen seismic tremors rippling across the Atlantic. Europe has jumped into action, pushing to create a so-called coalition of the willing and trying to come up with a peace deal to present to America. The Kremlin applauded the public humiliation of the Ukrainian leader and America's seeming policy shift. The Russian news agency TASS, which got into that Oval Office meeting under contentious circumstances while the AP was blocked, reported that President Volodymyr Zelensky, quote, interrupted, argued and was rude to the press. Many Republicans sang from the same song sheet, even those like GOP South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who was once an ardent supporter of Ukraine, called the meeting a, quote, complete utter disaster, unquote, and said he's never been more proud of Trump. Let's take a look.
I've never been more proud of President Trump for showing the American people and the world you don't trifle with this man. He was very positive. He was very upbeat. He wanted to get a ceasefire. He wants to end the war. And Zelensky felt like he needed to bait Trump in the Oval Office. JD was awesome. This was a missed opportunity. And the question for me, for the Ukrainian people, I don't know if Zelensky can ever get you to where you want to go with the United States. Either he dramatically changes or you need to get somebody new.
Majority Leader Mike Johnson, who said last year that he'd rather send bullets than bodies to Ukraine, said this on Meet the Press Sunday.
I've never seen anything like President Zelensky's behavior there. He berated and interrupted his host, and instead of expressing gratitude for the extraordinary help that the U.S. has provided his country and effectively helped him stay alive and stay in power. So the way that went down was very disappointing. I hope and pray, frankly, that President Zelensky will come to his senses, come back to President Trump, express gratitude as he should, apologize for his behavior there, and accept this mineral rights deal, because that is the best way for us to get to a point of peace over there in that region, and it's in the interest of both countries.
Many GOP lawmakers, like Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona, applauded Trump and Vance for standing up to Zelensky. He wrote, quote, dictator Zelensky had the audacity to disrespect President Donald Trump and VP J.D. Vance during what should have been a friendly meeting, and POTUS rightfully showed him the door. This is the leadership America has craved for 4 years. But some in the GOP did take the side of Zelensky. Senator Lisa Murkowski said, quote, I am sick to my stomach as the administration appeared to be walking away from our allies and embracing Putin, a threat to democracy and U.S. values around the world.
On the Democratic side, California Senator Adam Schiff tweeted over the weekend, exactly 2 people are celebrating the United States' great abdication, Trump and Putin. The world weeps, Europe acts, and decades of U.S. leadership have been lost. Well, go ahead.
Well, this is a very polarizing one because virtually all Democrats and even some Republicans, I think, are describing this as now we're on Russia's side and we've betrayed Ukraine. Meanwhile, conservatives are thrilled with what Trump and Vance did, heartily agree that Zelensky was rude and that he should come back with his tail between his legs if he wants this deal to survive. And I don't quite know, honestly, where public opinion is. I think, frankly, there's a lot more interest in foreign policy in general, and Ukraine specifically, in elite media than there is among the American people. But conservatives, at least, for a long time have shown dwindling support for continuing to fund Ukraine. And if I were to, I would say that Zelensky should have been more cognizant that public attitude to fund this war has substantially evaporated, and the reality is a deal needs to be reached.
So I always knew this was one of the topics today we would disagree on more strongly. I think there is a debate which you and I have had previously about funding for Ukraine and how the war ends. But I think that the behavior of Trump and Vance in that meeting was disgraceful, honestly, and I think they set Zelensky up. This idea that Zelensky was rude, the heated part of that confrontation kicked off when Trump suggested that Zelensky had an unreasonable hatred for Vladimir Putin. The guy invaded his country, doesn't think his country should exist, and is himself the dictator or the authoritarian that Trump tries to label Zelensky as being. Then you had J.D. Vance weighing in with this argument about, it's time to try diplomacy. And Zelensky made the entirely reasonable argument that when diplomacy was previously tried, Putin just didn't live up to his commitments. These are entirely valid things for Zelensky to raise. I think they were sparked by Trump and to an even greater extent Vance to try to provoke a confrontation, because I think the whole momentum in the Trump administration is to try to get out of any moral obligation to help Ukraine, and I think that's wrong and disgraceful.
Well, I don't know that trying to get out of any obligation to help Ukraine is wrong or disgraceful. I think it is possible, I don't know that it is the case for certain, that Vance did what he did in a very calculated way in order to tank the mineral deal, because I think there are many both libertarians and populists in the MAGA coalition who don't even want the mineral deal, because does that end up putting Americans in potential harm's way? I mean, it very much matters what Russia feels about this deal, and if they're, again, I just want peace. I want diplomacy. I'm happy to have an economic arrangement with Ukraine if it is safe for Americans to be involved there. If it's not, or that's unclear with Russia, well, then that's actually could be a covert way to draw the U.S. into providing actual military support for Ukraine. And if we don't have that worked out on the Russian side, well, then we're actually getting closer with this deal to World War III than we'd be currently when we're just sending money. So I suspect J.D. Vance might have that concern and was perhaps trying to sabotage the deal on that basis. And I'm not sure that's wrong on a policy outcome. Look, I don't care very much I just don't care about decorum or whatever, and that goes both ways. I don't care that Zelensky doesn't wear a suit. I don't care about that at all. That a lot of right-wing people are mad about that. I don't give an F. I don't care. Sure. This is very silly. But I also don't care that they were arguing in front of the media. I would actually rather have our politicians arguing in front of us where we can see, rather than argue behind closed doors and then have then they do the fake, we're on the same page, sort of in front of you, we all agree, when they actually have serious, profound, fundamental disagreements. Have them in public so we can judge for ourselves.
I don't disagree with the idea that it is useful to have arguments in public. We have them quite frequently.
What if we had our argument behind the closed doors and then we just gave a synopsis?
Pretend that we agree on everything. That would serve nobody. But the point here is, Trump is berating a guy who is trying to save his own country against very, very steep odds, and in the process implying that the United States is at least or at best neutral to a large nation invading a sovereign country that borders it, and that, that's just what happens. And this is Trump going after this guy, an American president who got out of Vietnam service because of bone spurs, going after a guy who has been trying to shore up the defense of his country for 3 years.
So I will agree with you that there's a little too much, the anti-Zelensky fervor on the right goes further than I would go for certain. And I'm a little wary of, and then it's also a little too kind toward Vladimir Putin. I don't want to be more proximate to Russia or more dismissive of Russia's authoritarian impulses. Russia remains a global rival. So I agree with you on that. But I think what you just said, like trying to save his country is painting a rosier picture of what he's doing. You can argue he's had no choice but to take the actions he's taken because his country did get invaded, but just throwing more Ukrainians into what is likely, what is almost certain over time to be a doomed effort to defend the country is, I don't, like, how many more people are we willing to let die on both sides of this conflict in order to say it's so important that this part of Ukraine, this territory that has been conquered by Russia, remains a part of Ukraine? 100,000, 500,000, a million, like, just reality is that more and more people will die until an agreement is reached or until the entire country is conquered by Russia. And so I don't think, like, the trying to save his country, like, our intentions can all be very good, and I agree that he's invaded, which is why I don't go to the mat 10 out of 10, bad guy, dictate, you know, the word so evil, responsible. I don't agree with any of that. I don't care how he dresses, but his intentions might be perfectly good. But the reality is the reality, and the reality is Russia will win this war and is killing people left and right, his own people. Like, he's saving the boundaries of the countries at the expense of everyone in it dying. It doesn't seem so great to me.
But the argument that you're making is essentially an argument for appeasement. It is to say, if a larger country does something to a smaller country, then that's just tough for the smaller country. And if its territory gets taken, well, there's got to be a price for peace. At some point, you have to maintain or seek to maintain the territorial integrity of the country.
Well, does the U.S. have to do that? We're not committed to defending Ukraine on paper. If it's very important, Europe can. And look, they're all forming a coalition to defend Ukraine or whatever. That's fine. They would be less addicted maybe to Russian energy if they were real serious about countering the threat of Russia. That would be the most damaging thing they could do. And of course, Trump's been warning about that for years. But if they want to spend the money on it, fine. I just don't know why the boundaries of this country need to be predominantly our problem.
I just think that if you go down that road, you get into a situation where you just say the United States will no longer play any leadership role, and into that void come Russia and China and various other adversaries, and I think it's very dangerous.
Will you tell us what you think? We'll have more Rising right after this.